Okay. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all back. After a long hiatus, we are set to resume our offline events. A gentle reminder to please keep your mobile phones on silent. Our guest for today requires little introduction. It is often said that when he makes a mistake in English, the dictionary gets corrected. Or more so, even the Oxford Dictionary feels dumb in front of his English. Respected Presidium, past presidents, governing body members, and my dear Flow friends, I would like to introduce our guest for today, the impeccable Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a third-term member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, is the best-selling author of 23 books, both fiction and non-fiction. Besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and a former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs in the Government of India. He has won numerous awards, including the Pravas Bharati Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossford Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, Dr. Tharoor was also awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in the category of English non-fiction for his book An Era of Darkness. He chairs the Parliament Standing Committee on Information Technology. Moderating the session today is author Ira Mukhoti. Ira studied natural sciences at the University of Cambridge. She writes historical non-fiction. I would now like to invite Ms. Ujjwala Singhania, the 38th National President, FICCI Ladies Association, and Director, JK International, to give her welcome address and felicitate the guests. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone today. We have with us none other than Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a man who straddles multiple roles with equal ease and elan. A politician, a writer, a former diplomat, an orator par excellence, and a vocabulary like no one else. It's my privilege to welcome you on behalf of Flow. Flow is the oldest business chambers for women in South Asia with over 8,000 members across 18 chapters pan-India. With a history of 38 successful years of women empowerment initiatives, Flow has been able to build a formidable network of motivated and talented women, which in turn contributes to a more enlightened and strong society. In one of your articles, What Indian Politics Does to Women, Dr. Tharoor, you have very rightly highlighted the need to focus on providing training and mentoring programs for women to develop their skill set and help them to realize their full potential. Women's political participation is a fundamental requirement for gender equality and direct engagement in public decision-making to ensure a better accountability to women. I can today proudly say that Flow has been working in this direction with committed strides. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, your experience, your journey as an innovative leader. It would be very enriching for us to know about your recent book, which brings together the very best fiction, non-fiction, and poetry from your published books and journalism. Thank you, Ms. Ira Mukhoti, for being with us today. Dr. Tharoor, I would like to ensure that Flow firmly believes in your dream for an India that celebrates diversity. I conclude with a quote by you. India has been born and reborn scores of times, and it will be reborn again. India is forever, and India is forever being made. Proud to be Indian. Thank you. Namaste.
I would like to invite Ira Mukoti to please take the session forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. This is a very emotional moment for me, not simply because I'm in the urbane company of Dr. Tharoor, but because it's the first session I'm attending in person after 2.5 years. So it's really wonderful, but we have very little time, so I'm going to jump straight into the questions.
Thank you, Ira.
Yes. And in fact, yes, you have to go straight to a parliamentary session after this, and this is slightly symptomatic of the first question that I had, in fact. You are somebody who has achieved, it seems that you are a man in a great deal of hurry. You have achieved so much in such little time. I was reading through the introduction, I think, and you were the youngest person at 22 to receive a PhD from Tufts University. And just 10 years later, you then went on to write one of the groundbreaking novels in Indian literature. So the very first question I had actually was going to ask you about this sort of thing. What drives you? What motivates you? And then reading this wonderful book, which is a selection of different aspects of Dr. Tharoor's life, I actually got a bit of an answer to this question in a wonderful chapter called The Heart of My Father. You actually lay out very candidly and very honestly that he is the reason that you have achieved so much in life, that has driven you. So can you tell us a little bit about your father and the role he has had in your life?
Right. No, he was a wonderful man, the biggest influence on my life in all sorts of ways, and very much a self-made man. The family had gone through hard times. He lost his own father when he was 10. So he's known struggle, he's known hardship, but he worked hard. He was blessed with an elder brother who had supported the family after the father's death, and who then took the younger brothers. My father was the younger. There were two others younger than him, and they all went off to England after the World War, and amidst all the rationing and all the challenges there, made their way in life. And my father then had a pretty decent career in the advertising business, not for an advertising agency, but at the other end of it, that is the people who publish the ads, the newspapers and magazines. He was with the Statesman, became advertisement director, Reader's Digest later. So it wasn't necessarily his professional career that inspired me, but the fact that he drove himself very hard and drove himself with a tremendous amount of commitment to developing all his own interests as well. He was always somebody who was a bit of a type A driven personality, in that after a long day's work, he'd always have some extracurriculars to be involved in, whether it was the advertising club, he was the secretary of that in Bombay, the president of it in Calcutta, whether it was the Bengal Kerala Cultural Society that he founded in Calcutta to encourage cultural interaction between his state and the state he was living and working in, whether it was founding the Parent Teachers Association in my school in Bombay, the Campion School, which he did, served as its first secretary. So he was always doing things. I mean, he instilled in me the idea that, as long as there are hours left in the day, there's more you can accomplish. At the same time, he had rather fragile health. He had his first heart attack at 38, second at 50, passed away at 63. And so as a small child, I was very conscious of the perishability of good fortune, of security, of the comforts of home. What would happen if suddenly something took him away? And perhaps as a result of that, I never wasted any time either. I found myself very conscious of the need to drive myself to fulfill my obligations, do my homework on time, whatever, but also to multiply what I would do with my time beyond the exigencies of the classroom and examinations in college. And so I too, for example, would finish my homework at the end of the day and write. I was an asthmatic child, and that again limited how much I could do. I couldn't always go out and play with my friends if I'm gasping for breath and wheezing. And in those days, it was before we had inhalers and all of those things, so it wasn't exactly easy to cope with a sudden onset of bronchial asthma. The only medicines they had were these very strong tablets that made your heart go thud, 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 and somehow forced open your passages so you could breathe a little bit, but you couldn't sleep or anything. So there I was, this wide-eyed little child sitting up in bed, unable to sleep, barely able to breathe. No television in the Bombay of my boyhood, no Nintendo, no mobile phones, no PlayStation. I mean, they were simply, the only distractions were books. And so books became my escape, my entertainment, my education. And eventually, when I ran out of books to read, which wasn't difficult since I was the oldest child, no elder sisters or brothers to borrow books from, I ended up trying to write some of my own. So I started writing stories, more or less as a way of keeping myself occupied while propped up in bed.
But these are very candid confessions. I found that chapter really very moving, and I was taken aback at the honesty of it. Now, in today's day and age, we are very used to our celebrities being rather airbrushed and in a cookie cutter mold. Everybody is the same. They say the same things. Our politicians are constantly involved in doublespeak, so we don't know what they are saying. Has your honesty, your candid nature ever gotten you into trouble? Is this something, how do you handle the world you are in?
Well, I think with this book, it almost did when Karan Thapar interviewing me on the book focused entirely on some of the not entirely sensible things I had said about my mother. And so, I refused to tweet the link to that interview. And so, what are you doing to me? He said, but you wrote it. So, yeah, sometimes being too honest it doesn't go well with somebody in public life where appearances must be kept. And so we have to be a little careful. But, I don't define myself principally as a politician. I'm a human being. Politics is part of my response to the world I see around me. And my writing is also a part of a response to the world I see around me. And sometimes I respond through my political work and my interventions in the public space, the national conversation. And sometimes I respond to the world through my work and through my writing and so on, the causes I take up, and through my politics and the causes I take up. So it so happens that that when I write, I sometimes tend to forget that I'm a politician and write as I would want to be read. And once in a while, as in a book like this, which combines both kinds of writing, the honesty may be perhaps more than is entirely wise for a politician. But as I say, I don't really allow that to be the defining feature of who I am.
So a biography would be a very exciting book of yours to read then, Dr. Tharoor.
I have so far refused. A few publishers have come to me, not just my regular publisher, but even others. And I've told them that I don't feel ready for it to begin with. I don't know whether it's foolishness or vanity to say that I don't feel I've reached the stage where I can look back on my life yet. I think still a lot more to do. But at the same time, there's always a risk that you think you always have time later, and one day the time isn't there and you're gone and you haven't written what you wanted to write. Doesn't matter. I think ultimately what I leave behind would be more in the realm of the ideas that I've tried to give expression to, which I'm proud of and which I hope will endure. I mean, for me, one of the most gratifying things in my life is the novel you referred to, the great Indian novel, is still being read by people who were not born when it was published the first time. So that's, for me, what's really richly satisfying.
Fantastic. You also had an almost 30-year career as a diplomat. So I found one chapter particularly interesting, the one about your run-up to the top post to be Secretary General. And for the layperson, the Secretary General post is something like the Olympics. Once in 4 years we get excited. We hear about sports like skeet shooting and synchronized swimming, and the rest of the time it's only cricket. We forget about all the rest. So, so it's a little bit the same, the Secretary General, the election to that post. But I remember all of us being very excited. I think it was in 2006 when there was this rumor that an Indian could possibly get this top job. And so for a little while, for a few weeks, everyone was talking about this. And then it didn't happen, we forgot all about it. But this is a very interesting chapter, and there's all sorts of things that happen behind the scenes. The fact that you speak very good French was, an asset with the Chinese foreign minister or the foreign secretary, I don't remember who.
It was a bigger asset with the French, but,
yeah, I'm sure.
but the Chinese.
Can you tell us about that a little bit?
It was just one of the anecdotes in the book is that when the government of India asked me whether I'd be interested in contesting, because you have to be nominated by a government, and I'd never worked for the government. I'd worked as an international civil servant to the UN all my life, so I was flattered, and I said yes, I would be. And then, as we discussed the possibilities and the risks, the both of us felt that the one country we needed to worry about was China, because I was Indian. So I agreed that I would, so rather than have the Indians ask the Chinese, I would ask. And so I knew the Chinese ambassador to the UN, the permanent representative, and I called him and I said, listen, I'd like to go to Beijing. And he said, you're welcome anytime. I said, no, wait a minute, I'm not coming on behalf of the UN. This is the reason that I'd like to come. I'd like to talk to the foreign minister about whether China has a view on my candidacy if I were to be nominated. So he said, and I said, listen, please check with Beijing whether I'd be welcome for a discussion on that. And if you tell me that I would not be welcome, we'll get the message and that'll be the end of that. No embarrassment, no face lost. So he said, I'll check with Beijing and come back to you. 2 or 3 days went by and then he promptly called and said, the government of China says you'll be most welcome. I'd love to see you there. So I said, okay, I just want to stress once again, I'm not coming on behalf of the government of India. I'm not coming on behalf of the UN, buying my own ticket and coming to Beijing just for this. So he said, in that case, we will send a car to the airport to receive you. And they did. And the foreign ministry sent a car and I was whisked off straight from the airport to meet the foreign minister. And what was particularly interesting was that he was, as all these Chinese foreign ministers, all career diplomats. They're not political as in our country, though we too have now made an exception and appointed Mr. Jaishankar, who is a career diplomat. But so far, all our ministers are politicians, and the career diplomats stop at the foreign secretary level. But in China, it's not that way. So this gentleman was very sophisticated, knew both English and French. But when I sat down for the very formal meeting, and it was chairs like this, and translators behind, and bottles of water, and the tea being served, all of the formalities, he was very correct and initially spoke Chinese through a translator. That was the way the Chinese like to do it. When I replied, he got impatient with the translator. No, I understand, so I replied in English. And so we talked about it. And at one point he switched to French just to test me. He had been ambassador in France and so on. His French wasn't bad at all. And as we spoke in French, he got, shall we say, impressed. And then he pulled out a napkin and said, all that remains is for you to learn Chinese. And then he started writing my name in Chinese characters on a napkin. I kept that somewhere. I have no idea where I put it now in all the moves since then, but there it was. And that was the story of it. But in any case, it ended with him saying in English, without the translator, China will not stand in your way. So armed with that assurance, I gave a report of that to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and they decided, I guess, to go ahead, knowing that the Chinese would not be vetoing. In the end, the Chinese were as good as their word. In fact, on the first ballot, they voted for me. I think they were quite alarmed to see how well I'd done, because I came within 2 votes of the front runner, Ban Ki-moon, and ahead of 5 other candidates who were foreign ministers and deputy prime ministers and princes. So it was a bit of a shock for the Chinese. So in subsequent rounds, they abstained, but they never voted against me, which is something that people here found difficult to believe. They had this thing that, ultimately it should be an Asian, and they felt, perhaps because they'd seen me in action at the UN, they knew that they could work with me. But in the end, it was the Americans who chopped me off at the knees, and that was that.
Welcome. Talking about language and your, almost 30 years in the rarefied, drawing rooms of the UN, you then jumped into politics in Kerala very successfully, I may add. How does a person like that, you call yourself a stranger in a strange land when talking about Kerala, you say that growing up, you spoke Pidgin Malayali and you didn't know the great text and a lot of the culture was, a little foreign to you. How does a person like that, an Anglophile, a person, in your situation, then jump into the rough and tumble of Indian politics at that level and be so successful? How
it was an act of incredible effrontery and foolishness, because I honestly had no clue what I was getting into. when I was asked whether I'd be interested in contesting, I cheerfully said yes. I had this kind of glamorized idea of elections that you see on TV or whatever. My God, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I've been in some hard situations. I have, dealt with an ongoing civil war in Yugoslavia. I've encountered refugees in the deserts of the Horn of Africa. I've done all sorts of things, but nothing was as tough as contesting that election, my first election, because I got there quite unprepared. I actually had opted for Thiruvananthapuram, even though my parents were from Palakkad, which is actually a very different part of the state. But Palakkad, first of all, the constituency that my parents' villages were in Palakkad district, but in a different constituency called Alattur, which is a reserved constituency for SC/ST. So I couldn't have contested as a local boy because my parents' homes and so on were not in a place where I was eligible to contest because I'm not SC/ST. So Palakkad town itself, they wanted me. But the problem there was it's a largely rural area. There's a town and there's a very strongly rural area around it. And I was ignorant enough that I thought that Thiruvananthapuram, being a sophisticated urban area, the state capital, I knew my books were available in translation in Malayalam, so people would have read me, etc. So I insisted on contesting from Thiruvananthapuram. Now, the irony of ironies is I only discovered after I got there that though Thiruvananthapuram is the capital of Kerala, 67% of the constituency is actually rural and fisher folk. And, here I am, this vegetarian having to represent the fisher folk and get their votes. And the very small tribal belt there and village areas. So it was a fascinating sort of eye-opening exercise in going out and discovering the place I had presumed to be allowed to represent. And then the second thing was, of course, my opponents took it exactly the way your question did, Ira. They said, who is this guy to represent us? He's only used to wearing three-piece suits and sitting in air-conditioned offices in places like New York. How can he speak for us? What does he understand? Put him in an air-conditioned office. Don't send him to be our parliamentary representative. And I was able to refute that by the simple experience, number one, of putting on a munda and a shirt, because the munda is the Kerala dhoti, which is simply worn like you wear a towel around your waist. So it's not very difficult to wear. And I'd actually worn it on holidays to my parents' villages. And because my parents had insisted on bringing me and my sisters back to Kerala every year during our childhood, we picked up some Malayalam. It wasn't sophisticated, literary, mellifluous Malayalam, but it was adequate. So what I did was I would go out and talk to people and meet people. It was the hottest time of the year, the hottest month of the year. April, late March to late April was the campaign. So I was there, trudging the hot and dusty streets, as it were, speaking to them in ordinary Malayalam. And then at the end of it, I would say, listen, you can see that I have enough Malayalam to understand your hopes and your needs and your aspirations. But far more important for you, I have the English and the Hindi to express those wants and needs in Parliament in Delhi. What good does it do you to have a parliamentarian who speaks excellent Malayalam but can't make himself understood in the national parliament? And this argument hadn't occurred to my opponents. The seat had been held in the two previous elections by the Communist Party. So there I was challenging the sort of, party of the proletariat. And I was actually saying, I can be more useful to you. And the voters bought this message very clearly. And I won with a record majority in those days of a lack of votes in a four-cornered contest. So it was quite something. Thereafter, of course, I spent more time in the constituency as an MP, including bringing a lot of benefits and development work to the rural areas. And as a result, when I survived my next election, which was a tougher one, it was the rural votes that got me through and not the sophisticated English readers who always, all over India, essentially use election day, if it's near a weekend particularly, to take a long weekend off and go and push off and have a vacation, don't bother to vote. It's the honest poor who actually saved me. And now it's happened 3 times, so I'm very, very grateful to the voters of Tiruvannanthapuram.
That's a wonderful story. It would be wonderful to continue to talk to you, Dr. Tharoor, but we are very tight on time. So by popular demand, there's a rapid fire. Do we have time for that, Smriti? We'll just launch straight into that, a minute or so, and then we can take questions and answers. Because you mentioned punditry in your title, so I'm going to question you on a few things, mostly to do with words and food. So about food and their origins, which eponymous English lord created a popular fast food so that he didn't have to spend too long eating at the table?
The Earl of Sandwich.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, he used to love playing cards. So he didn't want to interrupt the card game to go off and have a meal. So he invented the sandwich. He got them to put some meat or whatever between two slices of bread, bring it to him at the card table so he could hold it with one hand and eat while playing cards with the other. And that's how the sandwich was born, 1700 and something.
True or false, French fries are actually Dutch?
I don't know, because the French call them just pommes frites, which is fried potatoes, but the Americans call them French fries, and the English just call them chips. Are they actually Dutch?
They are Belgian.
Belgian. Oh, well, there you go.
Close enough. Okay, so the English, as we know, went around the world conquering countries and taking back a lot of art, but they also took a lot of words back. A lot of loan words in English actually are foreign in origin. So can you tell us which foreign language these English words are from? So the first group is parachute, detour, faux pas.
So faux pas, of course,
All
is...
three are from one language.
Yeah, they're all from French.
Correct.
Yeah.
Karaoke, futon, and honcho.
Japanese.
Yeah. Tofu, ketchup, gung ho.
Chinese.
Yes.
And loot comes from Hindi.
Tycoon and mogul both mean the same sort of thing, but are actually not English words. Do you know which country these are loan words from?
Well, Mughal is actually Mughal. And the tycoon, I think, is from Chinese via Malaysia.
Japan I have, but it could be
maybe
questioned.
it's Japanese, quite possible.
From I think the taiko, meaning nobleman, some such.
Okay, I mean, I was thinking more of things like taipan and so on in Chinese, but maybe it could well be Japanese.
Famous or infamous sayings by recent politicians. There are no disasters, only opportunities, and indeed opportunities for fresh disasters.
That's such a great line. I'm not sure I want to give them credit for it. Who said it?
Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson, very good, very good. He is the living embodiment of that principle.
Exactly. It's really cold outside. They are calling it a major freeze, weeks ahead of normal. Man, we could use a big fat dose of global warming.
Wow, that's obviously a politically incorrect line. Some American it has to be.
It is, not the American of...
Donald Trump?
Yes. I don't read books by someone who has betrayed the motherland.
Ooh.
Someone who's in the news right now for wanting to start a war.
Putin?
Yes.
Wow, all right.
A witticism in an airport security line is like a Swiss tap. Turn it on and you instantly find yourself in hot water.
That was me. That was me.
And finally, what do Shashi Tharoor and Sonu Sood have in common?
Shashi Tharoor and who?
Sonu Sood.
Sonu Sood. Well, I tried to do good humanitarian work, but he's got more money for it than I have.
It's an international award that you both got by PETA.
Oh, I see. Yes. The hottest vegetarian? Yes. Is that my word? Mine is a long time ago, so I can't live up to it anyway. I was the hottest vegetarian of 2010 or something, alongside Vidya Balan, as I remember. Right. And Sonu Sood is obviously of a more recent vintage. Yeah. Just a bit.
So on that bombshell, I will hand it over to the question and answer.
Thank you, Ira, for really exciting questions. And yes, we would still vote you as the hottest vegetarian years down the line.
Yeah,
so, do we have time for
Yeah, go
questions?
ahead.
Yes, we have some of our past presidents here, and it would be lovely if Malvika ji and I'll just get the mic here.
I think the mic's coming to you, Mala.
Can you hear me? Okay. Amongst the leaders of the current times or in the past, who has impressed and inspired you the most?
Well, honestly, I mean, I know it sounds like a cliche and people will say, oh, he's a congressman, he'd say, but honestly, Nehru, genuinely, because the man had an extraordinary mind, which I don't think people have fully appreciated because frankly, we don't read enough anymore. Just read his books and you'll realize he's one of the great political writers of the 20th century. It's quite extraordinary what a mind he had. And on top of that, you know, I don't agree with everything he did or stood for, and nor should you, but the fact is that what India is today, in very many ways, we owe to him. And if you want a fuller appreciation of why I'm giving you this answer, please read my book, Nehru, The Invention of India. It's very short. It's short and straightforward. It's got all the essentials of his life and also gives you the legacy. I think that's why my answer would be Nehru.
And if I go to current?
Current lot, you look for different qualities. I mean, Mr. Modi impresses me because of his oratory, his drive, and his single-minded determination to succeed at any cost. Often, sorry to say, at the cost of the values and principles we'd like him to hold up, and at the cost of the Constitution and political morality. But he's just very good at what he does. He succeeds. So that's something you have to have a grudging respect for. Amongst others, I think if you look at Sonia Gandhi's life, it's quite astonishing what she's accomplished from where she's come and the adjustment, the extraordinary scale of the adjustment she's made. You can't think of an equivalent in any other country in the world of what Sonia Gandhi has done, coming from a foreign country, marrying here, growing up, suddenly being pitchforked into a public life she never sought because of her husband suddenly becoming prime minister after her brother-in-law was killed in a crash, right? Then the husband himself is killed. She goes into seclusion, then she emerges from it and heads the largest political party in the world at that time, in a country where she has to function in a language she didn't grow up with, dealing with a profession she never expected to be a part of. And she brings that party to victory twice at the national level. I mean, these are not small things. And you can't really, I think, people have all this like and dislike and so on, but if you really think of what that means as an accomplishment, it really is quite extraordinary. Exceptional, unique. Evita, not quite the same. First of all, Evita was Argentinian. Interesting. I better go refresh myself on the career of Evita to see what. Because don't forget, Evita had a husband who built up that party, whereas Sonia Gandhi had to do the job without her husband at her side.
Then where does that leave Mr. Nehru?
I'm sorry?
That's a contradiction. It's not that she built up the party. It's been the
No, an existing party which had gone through rather rough times, right? So when she took over the leadership, it was a party in opposition that splits asunder in many ways, in many fragments, and she was able, starting off actually with a defeat, as you know, in the elections of '98, to pull it up. So '98, '99 setbacks, 2004, 2009 victories. That's the journey I'm talking about. But I take your point.
From me, what do you think is India's political climate like? What do you think is the future of Indian democracy?
Ujjwal, I think it's toxic actually right now. I think the political climate is toxic. There's a degree of polarization I never dreamt I would see. I mean, I grew up in an India in the 60s when people were constantly giving you exhortations for people coming together, harmony, national integration. It was the aftermath of partition. No one wanted to ever witness those horrors again. And from all podiums, all parties, the message was one of peace, reconciliation, brotherhood. You had those days, I don't know how many of you, you're all too young to remember entertainment tax for movie theaters that you had to pay on your tickets. And they would waive entertainment tax for movies that extolled the coming together of people across communities and other distinctions. So a movie like Amar Akbar Antony was, free of entertainment tax in many states, because it basically gave the message that we were all brothers under our different religious identities. That was the culture that was officially being encouraged. And I grew up taking that almost for granted. I mean, in '71, when I was in high school, we won the war against Pakistan or Bangladesh. And the head of our army was a Parsi. The head of our air force in the northern sector was a Muslim. The officer commanding Eastern Command was a Sikh. The officer flown into Dhaka to negotiate the surrender of the Pakistanis was Jewish. I mean, that was India, right? And so for us, I certainly went to school with kids of every conceivable faith and background. My parents never mentioned, that Muslim boy who came home or that so-and-so caste. And it was never mentioned. That was that generation that had valued what independence meant and freedom meant. They had imbibed those values, and so they brought us up, frankly, to be like that. Somehow we've lost it. And how we lost it, I still don't understand fully. But we've lost it in a way that seems quite comprehensive, where there's things being declaimed from public political platforms these days that were unthinkable to utter behind the closed doors of your own home when I was a child, when I was young. People wouldn't have spoken like, they would have been considered just beneath you to speak like that. Now people are openly, and people with responsible positions, ministers and so on, are saying the most appalling things from public platforms. So for me, seeing all this has been absolutely shocking, and the quality of the political discourse has plumbed depths that no one in Nehru's era or even in the 60s and 70s would have imagined. So you're really looking at a very, very poor atmosphere. What do I hope for Indian democracy? I certainly hope that Indian democracy will prove greater than the inadequacies of its leading practitioners. I really hope that we will be able to bounce back. I mean, every country's had its ups and downs, has had unpleasant tendencies at various stages. Countries have even had civil wars. Countries have had bad phases. I hope this will be able to look back on this one day as a bad phase, as something that we had to go through before the voters, as they became more educated, more demanding. We were able to one day, I hope we'll be able to say, we replaced the politics of prejudice with the politics of performance. It really genuinely became about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. But at the moment, it's not. That's just a slogan. We're not seeing any evidence of it in daily life. Yeah, I'm officially late already. I won't make it by 4, but I'll take one last question since I know we started a bit
I
late.
think Poonam. Yeah.
Okay, I had a few questions, but then I will just do the fun question and for a short answer. You have said many interesting words, very simple and interesting words in your earlier talks, especially on your last book. One of them was, I hope I get it right,
Nihilipilification. Well done. Yeah.
So I just wanted to know, it's like that Kaun Banega Crorepati. You've got 3 choices. You can, of course, have more. Why do you do it? Is it to impress your constituency people that, you talk very good English? Do you do it because you want to pull the media's legs when they ask you some tricky questions? Or do you do it to troll the trolls on Twitter and other platforms?
So all of those are accurate, Poonam, well said. I mean, it started, as many of you will remember, when I lashed out at a particularly offensive television anchor who had just broadcast a whole series of horrendous lies about me in a so-called special. And I tweeted it in anger, this has been a farrago of distortions, misrepresentations, and outright lies by a showman masquerading as a journalist, right? And now, farrago was a word I've been using since Stevens College for debates 30 years previously. I never thought it was unusual, but for some reason, it created this huge kerfuffle around the country. And before too long, Oxford English Dictionary was tweeting, why have we seen 1 million searches for the word farrago from India, whereas at no day have we ever had more than 3 or something like that. And so that suddenly, and because of that, then people started opening Twitter accounts calling themselves Mr. Farrago, and suddenly this became a big thing. And I had not even realized it was a word that people wouldn't understand. And there were some who didn't understand masquerading, and somebody didn't understand misrepresentation. And so you actually had a whole sort of, so once that became then it became almost a joke that Shashi Tharoor uses words we don't understand, which honestly is not my objective, because if you want to communicate, you're a writer, you're a speaker, you want to be understood. So nobody wants to use words that won't be understood. But when this happened and was going on, I decided to play along with it precisely out of a sense of mischief. I could see the potential for this. So when my publishers, Aleph, asked me to announce the fact that the new book, the then new book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, was on sale, it's a book about Mr. Modi, as you can imagine. And so I tweeted, rather than just saying that the book was available, which frankly anyone could have done, I said, I want to show you that this book is not just a 400-page exercise in floxinosi nihilipilification. And then, of course, that was mischievous because I knew everyone wanted to know what that was. So I gave the definition, which is the act of estimating someone or something as worthless. So I'm saying I'm not taking 400 pages just to say this is worthless. There's more to it, so please read the book. And it had the exact purpose I intended, which is to draw more attention to the book through people's curiosity about the word. Then I carried on once in a while doing it for the reasons you mentioned, making a point, being mischievous, pulling the legs of the media and whacking the trolls, exactly. So, for example, when a particular chief minister who'd been elected to office as an ally of ours abandoned us and switched to the BJP side, which was shocking for us, I just tweeted, word of the day, snollygoster, First use 1845 US, meaning a shrewd and unprincipled politician. Latest use in India today. And I didn't mention his name, didn't mention the state, didn't mention the incident, but everyone knew what I was referring to. And that's how that happened. And then, and so it went. And I don't want to take up more time, but the idea was to constantly use this reputation, not so much against me, but as a tool to serve my own purposes. And I do it once in a while out of a sense. So once in a while, I will throw up a new word and provide the definition, just so that people, so I can make a political point by sort of tweeting, for example, a word like kakistocracy, and giving the definition, which is the rule by the worst and most unprincipled people in our country. So India becoming a kakistocracy would be the political message, but the word becomes a vehicle for carrying that message. That's the sort of thing. Well, I really will have to thank you all, and otherwise I shall be derelict in my duty, but it's been such fun.
Thank you so
and
much.
Thank you all for all your great
want
questions, starting with Ira.
Invite Ms. Jayanti Dalmia, President-elect, to give the vote of thanks. Thank you.
A very good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure for me to propose the vote of thanks today. It was an exciting and enthralling and enriching session with Dr. Shashi Tharoor. It was really interesting to hear your point of views. On behalf of Flow, I would like to sincerely thank you for giving us your valuable time and allowing us this opportunity today. As always, it was a pleasure and delight to listen to you. Thank you, Ira Mukhotiji, for moderating this session so beautifully. Sincere thanks to all our past presidents, Flow members, GB members, for being here today. It really means a lot to all of us for you to be here. In person, I think this is the first event we've had in Delhi. A sincere thanks to our sponsors, JK Cement, JK Lakshmi Cement, JK Fenner, JK Paper, and Art Denox. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, of course. Thanks, you.
Please take a group picture.
For the office bearers or who?
We all are.
Shall I come down?
No. You stay up. Otherwise.